stop. Okay, so I'm just going to be very honest with you. I'm really nervous. I'm very nervous for a variety of reasons. It feels like I'm coming home to my theater people, which is always great. And I'm also nervous because I feel like I'm probably going to hurt some feelings in this conversation, because I have been tasked with talking about disruptive alchemy. And for anyone out there who's a wordsmith, alchemy obviously is this weird hodgepodge stew of science, formulas, and a little bit of juju magic. And we're in this fun space right now where everyone's talking about immersive. It's like one of the most overused words right now, right? Everyone can fill me on this. So how do we make sense of this very attractive little like niche group that we've been for years that's now becoming the sort of attractor that's essentially getting a sugar daddy? How do we ward them off, still stand our ground and stay true to who we are as an industry and as creative collaborators while still getting paid and while still being sustainable as an industry? So those are the things that I want to talk about today. And I thought I'd first start out with something that I know we're all very, very familiar with in our immersive world, which is disclaimers. So I did a fun sort of exercise before coming in as part of my apology of the feelings that I might hurt in this conversation. So I just started looking through a lot of the disclaimers that exist out there in the immersive entertainment space. And y'all, there's a lot of sketch. But I thought I'd make it more of a fun activity. So I'm assuming everyone here has played Never Have I Ever. And if you haven't, I'll just give you the lowdown for middle school. Essentially, someone puts out a statement or declaration, and if you've never done it, then you take a shot, kiss a boy, kiss a girl, kiss yourself, whichever. What we're going to do for the purpose of this exercise is we're going to put our hands up, and if you've never done it, you put your hand down, and you keep your hand up if you can say that you've experienced that. So the good thing is we're all immersive artists in here, at least from the last survey. So I'll just start with the basic question of how many people in this room consider themselves immersive artist enthusiasts or immersive design enthusiasts or immersive experience enthusiasts? Raise your hand. Great. I figured that would happen. All right, so keep your hand up. And this is where a little bit of the bicep work is going to come in. So I'm going to read a bunch of disclaimers that actually exist from things that are out in the market today. And if you have experienced these things or had to sign off on this, take your hand down. So never have I ever experienced fog, loud gunshots, or explicit language. Never have I ever experienced a performance that takes place in an unconventional venue that poses safety hazards. Never have I ever experienced being alone with a single performer who engaged in provocative and shocking behavior. What? Never have I ever experienced a performance where you knew nothing about the mental or emotional state of the participants. Okay, that's awesome. So I guess what we can get from all of this is that there's a lot of crazy shit that people will literally give sign off on, right? For the sake of entertainment, exploration, enlightenment, and hopefully there's some sort of financial transaction happening where I'm paying you money to essentially scare the shit out of me, right? Which is great. So I figured let's start in accepting all these disclaimers, and then what I wanted to do is just touch on a little bit of my favorite disclaimers that exist out there, not necessarily related to immersive experiences. If you choke to death on a hot dog, this is natural selection, and management is not responsible. Thanks. Cards Against Humanity's disclaimer is, this is a work of satire. Please address all complaints and legit threats to former Vice President Dick Cheney. From the History Channel, the following true stories involve a Hitler sex exchange and exploding pancakes. Viewer discretion advised, and my personal favorite from IKEA, a Woodworth cedar-lined cabinet that says, "Not a Narnia getaway." So, lots of good disclaimers out there, which I think is a great segue for going into what we want to talk about, which is I just want to first say that this is not a history lesson. It's very apparent in here that everyone is an expert and comes from a deep place of passion in terms of understanding what discipline they're coming at in the immersive space, whether it's as a performer, a designer, a philosopher, an artist, but not sure if they're an artist, a business person. We're all coming at it from different angles, right? So I'm not here to necessarily paint the picture of who did what immersive thing best and who made who what money and all of that. We all have our personal opinions because it's all subjective. It's not a history lesson. We can agree on that, correct? Okay. But what I do want to talk a little bit about is just some of tying connectors to what I've experienced in my life and in my career. And as Noah was highlighting earlier, I started as a theater performer, and now I find myself in the themed entertainment and immersive realm. I've started plotting connective tissue between things that I'd experienced in my arc and what I identify as parallels in the immersive space and where we are today. So if I may, I'd love to paint a little bit of a picture of where I am now and how I got here. So Mycotoo is an entertainment development company. We're based out of Pasadena. We do projects worldwide. And we are super, super passionate about working with people and helping them achieve their dream. And a lot of times this comes from a core foundation of telling great stories in different scales, whether they're full-on theme parks or smaller live personal immersive activations or live events or museums and things like that. At the end of the day, it's about telling a great story. And we've been really fortunate to be able to do that. I serve in the development wing, which means partially looking at opportunities, new partnerships, being able to make money off of those and find the smart way to do it, but also pairing that or balancing that with the creative vision and making sure that we're staying true to who we are and not selling out and not sort of compromising to our sugar daddy developers. So I can assume that there's a little bit of amen in the audience in terms of what that compromise can be sometimes. What we tend to do is a lot of crazy fun stuff, and this just sort of highlights some of the projects that we've worked on, most notably Westworld, which you'll hear a lot more about later on today. But I wanted to highlight that really for us, it's not about all the song and dance and the sort of fluff or excitement. It comes from a core place, which is we're storytellers. Our owners are all theater people. We were talking Yale, Cal State Long Beach, Columbia, USC. We're stage managers, we are actors, we're writers, but we started out in a garage. And we came up with this idea of saying we're tired of doing themed entertainment that's just for commercial. We really want to do something that we're passionate about and bring our affinity towards storytelling into this new commercial space. It was a crazy idea because, again, we were in a garage, and at this time you have to understand that it was very anti what was going on sort of in the market, but we stuck true to it. And I hope that you'll see from some of the things that inspire what I do now that there's a parallel with what you're doing. So I'm going to go a little farther back than 2011, which is when we started, and take you back to the early years. So, oh, did someone say aw? Was it for Ursula? Because she was like the jam, you guys. So this really paints a picture of things that informed me as a kid. So I'm originally from Cameroon, West Africa, not West Virginia. And these were things that were cultural impacts in my life. Obviously, Whitney Houston, Dynasty, Who Didn't Love a Good Fight. But then other things that started coming in. And the reason why I put this image right here, this is Marred. It's a famous movie by an actor by the name of Amitabh Bachchan. And if, yeah, woo, right, Bollywood? If anyone is in the house who understands Bollywood, it is huge. And for me as a Cameroonian girl growing up, the options for entertainment were pretty much playing with your imaginary friend, maybe going to the park, or going to the one cinema that existed that coincidentally only played Bollywood movies. So a lot of my childhood was split between getting sort of rerun videotapes of things that were happening in the US and then watching Bollywood cinema. And little did I know that that would eventually become something that would be actually a really important factor of one of my career milestones. So I'll talk about that in a second. But I think it's pretty safe to say that I've been into performative arts for a long time. And I think in the 80s, we didn't have a word for cosplay, but now there's obviously terms for it. But it was fun for me to be able to find the theater space and find the sort of community of storytellers that would embrace my quirkiness. So obviously came to the US at a pretty early age and was able to go into the graduate program for theater. And in my case, it was at Columbia, where it was very much about experimental performative art, studying with Russian professors who were all about not doing things for the status quo, but really exploring who we are, doing viewpoints, movement. It wasn't cool, it wasn't sexy, and it definitely wasn't the kind of training that would get you work as soon as you graduated, which we didn't know until we graduated. So, but all those things informed who I was, right? These were approaching Brecht and saying, okay, how do we adapt Annie and tell the story of these orphans through a sort of Dada approach, right? How do we break it down into this dystopian thing and have people come in and really understand the strife of Annie? These are the kinds of questions that we asked. And at this point, the notion of immersive theater was very niche, very sort of isolated, and to be quite honestly, it wasn't something that you made money off of, or let alone a career. And this was in the early 2000s, late 1990s. So of course, graduated and realized that it was time to grow up. It was going to be not waiting tables, at least I was done with that. So I went on Craigslist and decided that I was going to apply for a legitimate job and make money doing the legitimate thing. So of course, I found a job in themed entertainment, which I thought was fantastic, all through Craigslist. I don't know if you can still do that anymore. But something fascinating happened. Because in that process, I started recognizing a lot of patterns in the development process that are actually not too far off of what we do in immersive design or immersive design and development. So some of these highlight some of the processes that you go through, right? In our case, at least at Mycotoo, we always start with the why. Very much, I'm sure there are a lot of people here who follow Simon Sinek. It's something that we really adhere to, which is understanding the vision, starting from a really strong story and understanding why you're doing that. And then letting that translate into the how and the what, right? The look, the feel, the technology, the theming, the designers that are coming in to collaborate, all the way through to opening day. And these are things that we do, or at least I used to do, in the immersive space. So I started sort of noticing a parallel there. But yet I had to separate the two, right? Because I'm in themed entertainment. It's about doing Disney-esque experiences that for all intents and purposes, is very sort of presentable, and you go in, you look, you step away, and thank you for your money. This is very different from what I thought I knew. Meanwhile, what I want to paint a picture is things that are happening in parallel. Again, this is the early 2000s, so bear with me, right? You're starting to see brands take an interest in this notion of immersive. And again, immersive isn't really a term yet. It's more of a pop-up, right? So you have brands like Comme des Garçons. They're doing these sort of like concept exploration businesses where they take over a small warehouse, or they find a dilapidated space and they sell product, but they create an environment where they partner with an artist to sort of help them enhance whatever story they're trying to tell. And you see that starting to pop up with other bigger brands where they say, let's just create a little concept experience thing, right? These are called pop-ups. Also at this time, we see Instagram sort of take hold. And so the notion of telling stories in isolation changes. Now people are able to share it and talk about it and kill it before it even goes mainstream, right? Because you have real-time reaction and response. And interestingly, this is the community that takes advantage of that. They understand, okay, if we're going to tell a story and we can only target a certain group, we need to rely on these influencers. And again, at that time, they weren't called influencers. They were just, it was just people on Instagram or whatever social media platform. So you have this parallel effort of concepts that are popping up in silos, but there isn't a connective tissue in terms of how they're being rolled out. And then on the flip side, you have these mega theme parks that are being put out, not necessarily in the US, because around that time, inevitably we would get to one of the bigger recessions in our history. But there was a lot of interest and hunger for the sort of mega themed experience in other countries, where it could be branded or non-branded, but they just wanted the facade, right? And at the core of all of this is this escapism, right? Whether it's an experiential one-on-one story that we're telling, or a massive space that brings thousands of people together, it's escapism on different scales. So you're dealing with two very different paths that are happening. And again, people aren't necessarily seeing the connection between them, but inevitably they will. And then also something that starts happening around this time is storytellers starting to say, hey, let's break that wall a little bit. Let's not just have our theater on a proscenium with a fourth wall and have people come pay, sit down calmly and leave, but let's actually make a concerted effort to invite people into our space. Let's make them uncomfortable. Let's blur the lines a little bit between fiction and reality. So then that brings me to the first ingredient that I'd like to sort of highlight in terms of this notion of disruptive alchemy, which is the notion of bold blurs, right? The disparity between these gray areas, fiction and reality, that disparity I find, just from observation, has more to do with the varying level of commitment and technical execution than anything else, right? So what informs that? Budget. Do we have money to be able to pull off this like one-time flash mob that has people coming in one direction and going out in the other, and then they get shaken up by an earthquake? Probably not. But can we scale it down to a certain level and make it grow over time and be creative as theater people in understanding how to use suspension of belief, illusion, lighting, all these classic tricks that we know, and bring people into that, audiences into that as part of that dialogue? So those gray areas are interesting, but we're starting, at that time at least, we were starting to see this blur. So for us, it was interesting, for me specifically. So also around this time, in 2013, I was brought in to be a creative director for a Bollywood theme park. This was with Mycotoo. And what was interesting about this is that all of a sudden, remember that Amitabh Bachchan, Bollywood cinema, why is this part of my lexicon of interests? All of a sudden, it became relevant in this context. So here I am, a creative director. I've never done creative direction for a theme park. I can talk about theater, I can talk about performance, I can talk about all these other things, but now I'm coming in and I actually can speak to it because I understand what Bollywood means, just for me personally. So it sort of allowed me to come from a place of truth of saying, we're not going to recreate Bollywood for everyone, nor do we want to, but we're going to come at it from our angle and hopefully tell a good story, which is a celebration of a genre that people connect with, that people have a very strong sort of resonance with. So that was interesting, being able to tap into some of these older experiences that would be considered, trivial, and now be able to bring it to a commercial theatrical space. The other example of this in another project that we worked on was Motion Gate, which was DreamWorks, Smurfs, and a bunch of other IPs. And the DreamWorks particularly was a great case study because that was a bunch of IPs like How to Train Your Dragon, Kung Fu Panda, and being able to really create a world in a box that you could come in and go into all these lands. Again, not the avant-garde experimental theater that's happening in parallel in other areas, but now starting to connect the dots between the value of strong storytelling and really creating your own incubator space that people can come in and sort of suspend belief and be in that world. So then this brings me to the next ingredient, which I call the Awkward Tango. And that, to me, is this battle that we have right now between immersive theater artists and the designer and the sort of ecosystem that evolves around that space, and the business, right? The developer, the real estate owner, the brand, the corporation that's now starting to recognize this idea of how do we create more exciting storytelling experiences. And it is a tango because it's not one or the other. And I'm hoping that in the series of slides that I show after this, we start understanding where we're headed and the value that this tango can bring in terms of our sustainability as an industry. So a good example of that will be some of the projects that I started highlighting as where we're starting to see a more concerted effort in bringing that level of storytelling into what's essentially a commercial space, right? So these are some examples of that. Like I said, Westworld, you'll hear a lot about later on today. But you're seeing like brands like Sephora, right? Huge cosmetic brands coming in saying, we're not just going to sell our product, we're going to take over a space and we're going to create little scenes, little vignettes with performers, brand ambassadors, whatever you want to call them, still telling a story about our product, but all through different filters. And you could call it a pop-up, you could call it experiential marketing. There are lots of words being used for these. But at the end of the day, it's still immersive theater, right? Just depends on how much do you want to dial it up or dial it down, and to what end? Is the end goal to make money? to just get people to talk about what you're doing, to be provocative, to maybe go rogue. This slide just highlights specifically how commercial space is starting to really dive in deep and spend more money in bringing that thinking that we already have into what they're trying to do. And then, of course, there's a lot of, at least since 2000, there's been a huge surge of some of these more immersive spaces. And what I love about this group right now is that some of these themes or thumbnails that I referenced, they're here tonight, right? They're here today for the conference. So I'm not going to go into them in terms of talking about what they are. We can obviously go online. But I think the takeaway from this slide is that it's a very crowded space, for good and bad. Crowded in the sense of people start a dialogue, people start an experience, people are pioneers in coming up with a new form of entertainment, and then there's replicas. The immediate thing that happens afterwards is, oh, that's successful. Let's just do the same thing, but change the title. Let's just do the same thing, but change the lighting a little bit, or downsize the cast, and change the language, whatever. But it's essentially, we're starting to see people replicate some of these pioneers. And so that's a challenge, right? How do we continue to stay true to our content and to continue to be unconscious innovators, as we heard earlier, and also grapple with the fact and the reality in this very competitive market that there are copycats and that there are people who will come in and easily, because they have more money or bigger space or whatever the reason is, come in and essentially do what you're doing, but with more noise, more sort of attention. Does that mean we change what we do as storytellers, or does that mean we double down on the authenticity and try to make it more unique so that you have no choice but to come to mine as opposed to whatever? And these are all conversations. But what I started to do was, in addition to some of these experiences, I started sort of doing a survey of some of what we consider the top ones, or at least the more recognizable ones that you could find online, as well as others that we'd been. And I found some interesting numbers. So the first one I thought was interesting was, the average footprint for some of these theatrical or immersive experiences ranged really from the footprint of your mobile device, where someone sends you a text message and the extent of your interaction is on your phone and you're getting some sort of exchange, to a whole city, a scavenger hunt, some sort of augmented reality, something, right? So the scale of this is all over the place, which may not necessarily reflect budget, because just being able to have that interactivity on your phone requires some sort of infrastructure, right, which costs money. So footprint isn't always reflected by budget, but there you have it. We have a huge range. And then $30 to $100, which just is more about math and understanding what some of these price points are. But what I thought was interesting was when I tallied up some of these experiences, at least I think there was about 50, the overall cost was like $1,000. So I thought, let me put that in context. Like, what does $1,000 mean? If I really wanted to go to each of these immersive experiences in San Francisco, New York, including airfare and all this, what am I basically choosing not to do by supporting our industry? And so here's a little bit of context. So that's 31 movies, or 31 trips to the movie theater, or in more relevant terms, 77 binge-worthy hours. So you sort of can do the math of what you would decide to do. And now maybe I'm speaking to the converted because we understand the space and we're fans of it. But this is a reality that we have to think about in a very competitive space where people have movie theaters and free parks and all sorts of other options that they have for entertainment dollars. And they have to decide, do I go to this immersive experience that costs $55? Or do I go to, pick another one? And that's part of being competitive, right? And that's part of the things that we have to think about is in terms of where the future is headed for our industry. So what's next? Just to highlight again some of the things that we talked about the bold blur, right? The gray area that exists between fiction and reality, and being able to commit to that and not be afraid of what that sort of uncertain area means in terms of our content. And then we talked about the sort of awkward tango, the reality that now there's a commercial sugar daddy coming in and saying, hey, immersive design, what is this? Come into my world. And more specifically, let's make money out of this, which is very awkward because then it starts becoming a dance of, well, is this the right thing to do? Why are we doing it this way? And so the way I wanted to look at it was more in lines of like what makes for a theatrical experience, or literally what makes it kick-ass, right? And again, going back to that disclaimer in the beginning of I'm gonna hurt some feelings. Everyone has different reasons for why they're here and what they relate to when they go to themed entertainment experiences or immersive experiences. But for me, these are just some things that I sort of connected with, right? Personal, spontaneous, unpredictable, uncomfortable, resonant, not always scalable or modular. So from a business standpoint, it's not something that can be replicated all the time. Brings value, unique, not always profit-driven. Now, the profit is a surprise a lot of times, but that's not always the initial intention. But that's shifting, right? So pair these core values of typically what makes for a great theatrical experience, just at face value, with what makes for a great business venture. Yeah, and the laughter is right, because you know where I'm going with this, right? For the most part, the opposite of these things, right? It has to be universal and accessible to everyone. It has to be predictable. We need to know the numbers, the ROI. Comfortable, resonant, scalable, modular, creates value, unique, profitable. These are core goals and priorities that typically drive how the business is going to run. And so you have to pair that with the other stuff, which I argue is the core of why immersive design and immersive theater and immersive experiences are, quite frankly, hot shit right now, right? Everyone is looking because they understand the value that it brings to their business, to their destination. You're seeing a lot of retail owners and shopping mall owners screaming and worried because everyone is shopping online, and so no one's coming to the mall. And so they want people to come in for an immersive experience to get them excited. How do you grapple with, well, I just want to make money? No, I want to tell a good story. I want to be revolutionary. I want to go rogue. Whatever those core differences are, we have to work together on them. So this notion of theatrical experience versus business venture is real, and that brings me to another ingredient, which is the paradox, right? Can immersive theater or immersive experiences be for-profit? Or how do they exist in this for-profit culture, right? Can the goal of authentic storytelling be compromised by the purse that's behind it? It doesn't always have to be, but I thought I'd use maybe 2 case studies to reflect how you should probably want to look at that. I'm not going to direct you in any one way or other, but these are just presentations of case studies, right? So, good example, just in social media or online, you have a very well-known campaign that happened featuring one of the Jenners and Pepsi, right? They said, we're going to take advantage of the momentum that's happening right now. It was the summer, I believe, of 2016, where the rate or sort of the fervor of police brutality and social unrest was at a forefront. Doesn't mean it's never been there. It just means all of a sudden people are paying attention, right? Now Pepsi says, I'm going to come in and we're going to create a commercial that's going to galvanize people and it's going to get to the heart of social injustice, and Kendall Jenner is going to be the face of it. And it was not well received, right? You can answer why. Everyone here has a personal approach to why they would think that. But then, on another hand, you had another campaign that was happening, similar sort of core messaging, social injustice, politics, police brutality, all of these things, and it was a Nike campaign backed by Colin Kaepernick, backed by Nike, and a variety of other artists who were in it, and it had a very different response. Again, doesn't mean this is universal, but I think we can all agree that the story behind each of these came from a very different place. The backing and the finances and the money was there, lots of money and marketing dollars put towards something, but the story and the vision and the why behind it, I would argue, were very different. And I think that's something that we have to think about as we start moving into this more commercial space. Then the last ingredient that I'd like to sort of highlight, and it doesn't really have a lot of slides, it really just is because, well, I'll just say it, it's the unicorn essence, right? Everyone in this room has a very strong feeling about what a unicorn looks like, but no one's really ever seen one. So, but we know it when it's there, and it's a magic. It's a specific sort of essence that makes you true to what you do. And I think that all comes back to, again, what's the story that we're trying to tell and why is it relevant? And then using the platform and the sort of creative disciplines that we have to be able to execute that. Those all range, again, based on budget and performers and venue and all these technical things. But that unique vision and ability to tell a story has to come from a place of why. And I think that's that unique sort of unicorn that makes us sustainable, no matter what money or what sort of commercial parameters come into play. Staying true to that core vision, I think, is what's going to keep us successful and hopefully disruptive in the future. So thank you. This is the end of my presentation. Again, I hope that I sort of shed a little bit of light on where our arc has gone and opened it up to a discussion afterwards, which is, if we're going to be disruptive, how do we continue to do that in this commercial space? But I'm very grateful to be here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Fri.